My experiences growing up in a haunted house. Deleted author. This is my experience of growing up in a haunted house. For me, it was normal. It was just part of my life. But to other people, the house was terrifying. It was decorated almost completely in Victorian antiques, and the front of the house was encased with a rusty old iron cemetery fence. So right off the bat, it was bound to come off as creepy. In the house, I always felt watched. There was a hallway that connected all the ground floor rooms, as well as a staircase that went up directly to my room. This hallway always had a weird energy to it, like someone was standing in it. I can't explain it, really. It just always felt like someone was there, and you'd constantly look over your shoulder at the doorways behind you. It was especially hard getting to sleep, and I was paralyzed by dread each night. Beyond this feeling, I had many odd experiences as well. I had a Barbie washing machine that randomly turned on in the night on 3 separate occasions. Another time, right as I left my room, a radio I had never used turned on, playing opera music. On another occasion, a friend and I were in the basement, and I heard creaking sounds of someone walking up and then back down the stairs, but no one was there. My phone disappeared twice, only to reappear hours later in the middle of the floor. And once while sleeping, a random voice shouted in my ear to wake up because my mom had forgotten to wake me up. And it was true. She had. I also had an auditory experience, once of a cat. I was home alone watching TV when I heard purring behind the couch, where my old cat had always hung out. The purring came around to the front of the couch and then by my ear, as if a cat was nuzzling me, but nothing was there. However, it gave me a very peaceful feeling. I saw 2 apparitions while living in the house. The first was when I was around 10 or so. I woke up in the night and saw a girl just standing there. She was wearing a Victorian-style nightgown and had long hair, maybe around age 5 or so. She was staring straight ahead and was transparent, but kind of glowing blue in the moonlight. She walked over to my stuffed animals I had right next to my bed and started touching them. "Do you like my toys?" I asked her. She immediately seemed spooked, like she hadn't seen me there before, and ran towards the door, disappearing before she got to the hallway. It sounds scary, but it really wasn't, and I went back to sleep. I saw the second apparition when I was around 18. I had dropped a friend off at her house that night and returned home to see a figure in the kitchen window overlooking the front of the house. My mom usually stood in this window while doing the dishes, so I thought nothing of it at first. But as I got out of the car, I realized there were no other cars, and my parents weren't home. I got back in my car and called them to come home. I didn't get out until they returned, and of course they just laughed about it, not believing me. Over the years, I had many other unexplainable experiences, many of which were witnessed by other people. These experiences followed me to my workplaces and my first apartment, but then stopped immediately when I moved out of state. I'm grateful that I can finally be in peace and not look over my shoulder constantly. It's definitely stressful growing up like I did. The Haunted Farmhouse Anonymous author. It all started in the 1980s when my husband's family moved into an old farmhouse. It was one of those dark, dilapidated ones you always see in movies about the paranormal, but they are quite common in the rural Midwest town he grew up in. According to his father, the place had served as a stagecoach stop at some point, but later was just a family home. It was 2 stories with a smaller little house on the property as well. My husband's sister's room were upstairs against the attic portion. And when my husband was born in the 90s, his room was at the bottom of the stairs. Often as a child, he would fall on those stairs. It could just be poor balance due to being young, but he always felt like something was pushing him, and he was scared of those stairs that bordered his room. On the same level of the house was his parents' bedroom. They would often hear inexplicable sounds in the night while they were trying to sleep. One sound that was that of marbles. It sounded like they were rolling across the floor above them, but seemingly without the barrier of walls. They would just roll on and on for what seemed like forever. The other sound was the log sound. Often, it would sound like large logs were hitting the roof and rolling down, but whenever they checked, there was nothing to account for it. Up in the middle sister's room, toys moved without explanation. Several times, she would complain about mice moving her toys. Once his mom went upstairs to see a Barbie car moving around as if guided by an invisible hand. Time to time, there would be whispers heard in the attic as well. My husband's mom was religious and prayed for the spirits to leave. Things seemed to calm down for a while, but the family soon decided to leave, not just because of these happenings, but due to hostile neighbors as well. After moving out, another family soon moved in to rent the property. A while later, his mom ran into them and struck up a conversation about how they were adjusting to the home. Apparently, they had been hearing constant whispering in the attic and had confined themselves only to the bottom level. Whatever my husband's family had experienced had gotten much worse since the new family moved in, to the point where they refused to use half of the house. Over time, they spoke less and less of the house, but we do have several hundred photos that were taken when they lived there. Weirdly, all of the photos are very dark, and double exposures are very common, but weirdly, only happen in photos that the middle sister is in. I'm not sure exactly what went on in that house, but there was definitely a lot of creepy stuff going on there. My poltergeist and moving object stories. Deleted author. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences in my life, so I figured I'd share a few. This is a collection of what I'm labeling as poltergeist, moving object experiences. I'm curious if other people have had similar things happen. Childhood home experiences. I grew up in an old house with Victorian-era antiques that was a couple of blocks from an old cemetery. I had a lot of bizarre happenings there, including seeing 2 full-body apparitions. As far as poltergeists, though, here are the things I experienced. Number 1. I had gotten a weird little radio from selling magazines for my school as a kid. I never used it. It was just one of those things that I chose to use up my points I had earned from sales. One day, I left my bedroom and headed down the hall. Out of nowhere, the radio turned on, blaring opera music. Again, I had never used it. It was switch operated, and somehow the switch got turned on. Number 2. I had this cool Barbie washing machine from 1991. It had buttons you could push to make it turn on, which would make a loud noise. Several times throughout my childhood, it turned on in the middle of the night. I thought maybe it was just old, but looking back, it was weird. It went on out of nowhere, and that it only happened around 3 in the morning. Number 3. On 2 separate occasions, my phone went missing. Before anyone thinks, sure, that happens, it wasn't that simple. Both times, I had been reclining in bed with the phone on the dresser next to me where I always kept it. Both times, I had left to get a snack and had this weird feeling come over me that my phone was missing, which only happened those times. Both times, I couldn't find it, and it showed up in the middle of the floor hours later. No one had been in my room either time. Thrift store experiences. A job I had. Number 1. There would often be knocking with no one there. This happened usually before and after hours at the donation door. However, when we would open the door, no one would be there. It absolutely terrified my boss, who was a very religious woman, and admitted she was terrified. Number 2. Every night, there would be loud sounds on the roof. This would also occur right at closing, like clockwork. It sounded like footsteps sometimes, and other times like heavy banging. We even went out to make sure no one was on the roof, and no one was. Number 3. One time, I was there shopping on my day off. I started talking to a regular customer who was maybe 10 feet away. Out of nowhere, my eye was drawn to a random glass teacup on the shelf, and a couple of seconds later, it flew off and shattered on the ground. No one had bumped the shelf, and it was just one of many in a set. It traveled out 2 feet and towards me 3 feet at an angle. I don't have an explanation. Retail barn, farm experience. Another job I had. Number 1. There was an upstairs mezzanine overlooking the barn where we sold home goods and jams, and we would often hear footsteps walking back and forth up there. But no one was there. Number 2. Once, while working alone in the barn, I was carefully hanging up ornaments on a very heavy display with a sturdy base. I had moved it to be centered between 2 pillars and put the last ornament on a display peg. I then turned to walk away, and the whole thing moved about 2 feet towards me. The ornament started flinging around like something had pushed it hard in my direction. I knew the distance it traveled because of the fact that I had centered it before putting the ornaments on. The Congress Plaza Hotel, Chicago, Illinois. Number 1. I stayed at the Congress Plaza several years back when visiting Chicago. At the time, I didn't know it was considered Chicago's most haunted hotel. I just knew it was in a good location and had cool historic features. The staff put me and my partner on a floor where it didn't seem like anyone else was staying. We got to the room around 8 p.m. and started to get settled when I heard hard knocking on our door. I thought maybe it was a cleaning person, so I looked out the peephole, but saw no one. I opened the door, and there was no one in the long hallway. There was nowhere near enough time for someone to have made it around the corner, and there were no footsteps or voices. Current house. This actually happened last year. My partner's mom passed away a few years ago, and while we were looking at our little pink Christmas tree, I said to my partner how I wish she could be here for the holidays. At the end of the night, we turned off all the Christmas lights, like usual, and went to bed. When we came home from work the next day, the lights on the little pink tree were on. This was a tree that needed to have one of those push switches activated to be turned on, which couldn't have happened on its own due to the sheer force needed. I like to think maybe it was their mom saying hello. Anyways, those are some of my stories. I hope you enjoyed. A feline friend. Anonymous author. Growing up, I had a few different pets. 3 dogs, a chameleon, a goldfish, and my tabby cat, who I'll call her Jay. Jay and I weren't always on good terms. She was already an adult when I was born, so she had to deal with me when I was an annoying kid, giving off way too much energy for her calm, older demeanor. Over time, though, we became friends. Jay was with me through my teenage years until she suddenly passed away one day. I remember finding her on the floor mid-meal and wrapping her up in a towel. Jay had been in my life since birth. She had been the one animal constant I'd had my whole life. She lived a good life, though. When she wasn't warming up at the heater behind the couch, she was roaming our 3 levels or exploring the neighborhood. She made it without any health problems to the ripe old age of 19, and for that, I have no regrets. With how she passed, though, there was no goodbye. It was sudden and unexpected. I often thought of her when looking out the window at her grave below the trees. I wondered if her soul was living on somewhere. Then one day, a cat spirit visited. It was a day like any other day. I was off school for summer vacation in college, and my family members were off working, so it was a perfect day to just lay back on the couch and binge-watch TV. As I flipped through the channels mid-commercial, I suddenly heard what sounded like faint purring. Confused, I muted the TV. However, the purring continued. I turned my head and realized that the purring was coming from behind the couch. The same couch Jay had laid behind at the heater. At this moment, the purring grew louder. It seemed to move from behind the couch to right in front of me and then right in my ear. It was like a cat was getting on the couch to nuzzle me. I felt a warm sensation take me over, a very relaxing energy, and then gone. It was over within about 15 seconds. I don't know for sure that it was Jay, but I certainly can't help but wonder. She was the only cat we ever had at that house, and the purring came from her favorite spot. I hoped that it was her, and that she was coming to give me that missed chance at goodbye. Wherever she is now, I feel that she is happy.